Everyone, welcome to another exciting edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. The publisher First Second doesn't pay me to say this or anything, but anytime I see a title coming from First Second, I'm really curious to check it out and got tuned into the work of the person I'm talking with on this episode, and that is Scott Chantler. Scott, thank you for jumping in, joining me, and talking with me for a few minutes about Squire and Knight and any other part of your creative history and journey that you'd like to mention.
Hey, thanks for inviting me, Jason. That's good to be here.
Not glad to have you. Very glad to have you.
And
Does
I'm glad to hear you love First Second as well, because
Oh
they're
yes.
a fan. They have been the publisher I've been working towards my entire career. I've always really respected what they've done, and being able to work with them on these last couple of books has been terrific.
Yeah. They publish really good stuff. And as we were talking before I hit record, I'm a teacher, and so I'm always looking at their catalog, always looking at what's coming out and coming up, and sort of making the plans for what I want to add to my shelf. So I really appreciate what they do in
They
broadening
take,
comics too.
they take big swings and interesting ones.
Yeah.
They make some really interesting decisions. And put out some terrific work.
Yes. Also, fellow fan of Citizen Kane as well. I'm going to go
Oh,
ahead and mention
yep,
that. Yeah,
that's right. I
absolutely.
keep that above
Absolutely.
my writing desk to keep me humble.
Yeah. This is a good thing to do for sure. Anytime I need to teach like framing and empowerment through camera angle and things like that, Citizen Kane, it's right there.
I saw it when I was 19 and in a film class in first year university.
Hmm.
And I had just discovered in comics the work of Will Eisner, and I knew I wanted to do this for a living. And I was just on the cusp of understanding that relationship between story and image and story and camera in film. And then I saw Citizen Kane, I think just when I was ready to receive it and be able to appreciate what Orson Welles was doing with the camera in that film. And nothing was the same again. Between Orson Welles and Will Eisner, it just dictates to this day the way I think when I pick up my pencil and try to put a comics page together.
That's cool. That's a cool set of connections and background. I usually ask about what connects you with storytelling and comics, and it sounds like film was right there, media was right there.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah, yeah. Uh, well, in terms of the Squire Knight series, I know you've worked on a variety of other titles. You were talking about working up to working with First Second. So I'm curious about the inspiration there and maybe how kind of your career so far has been leading to this.
Well, I've been doing comics for a little over 20 years.
Hmm.
Squire and Knight is book number 14. Uh, yeah, it's been a long road. It's been a good career. I started out, I always wanted to do this. I started out um, kind of in the early 90s when there was, a big collapse in the direct market. And, I think at the time I was growing up and you grew up wanting to do comics, the assumption was it was going to be superhero comics, or
Hmm.
at least really underground alternative comics, which was not necessarily a living. And in the early 90s, the bottom dropped out of the superhero market to a great extent. And, that was about the time I was in my early 20s. And I started to think, like maybe I missed it.
Yeah, yeah.
And so for the 90s, I was mostly working in commercial illustration. I worked for a corporate communications firm here in Canada in their art room, doing safety posters and loss prevention type imagery for, big companies and stuff. You'd go in the lunchroom at Walmart or something and you see a little, three image diagram of a person lifting with their legs and wearing their back belt properly. That was
Hmm.
probably me who drew that.
Hmm.
Uh, and I was getting paid to draw for a living, which was nice. But like I say, it wasn't what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
So about another decade went by before sort of the graphic novel boom in the early 2000s. And I had started a web comic in the year 2000 just on my illustration website, just to kind of scratch the comics itch a little bit. Wasn't expecting for that to be my way in to the comics business. But my friend, the comics writer Jay Torres, ended up being one of my readers of this webcomic. And he was pitching a series to Oni Press at the time, back when Oni was pretty new,
Hmm. Hmm.
and thought I might be a good artist for it. So he pitched me to the editor there, and a couple months later he got a green light, and suddenly I was in comics
Nice.
unexpectedly.
Yeah.
And like I say, we're getting into the graphic novel era here. So the thing that he had pitched as a 4-issue miniseries, they turned around and said, well, could we make this an original graphic novel instead?
Hmm. Hmm.
Which suited my instincts a lot better. I'm kind of glad I didn't break into comics in the 90s, because, what's been going on the last 20 years in terms of longer form work is really more in my wheelhouse. So I was more than happy to do that. And yeah, and that book came out and did well enough that Jay and I did a second book together. And then that book got me nominated for the Russ Manning Award at the Eisners.
Nice.
And then I started pitching my own stuff because I also wanted to write, like an Orson Welles or like a Will Eisner. I,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
I kind of got this auteur thing in my head. And it's like, yeah, I want to do it all. And so I started doing that. And yeah, so I did another book for Oni. The first thing I wrote was called Northwest Passage,
Hmm.
which
Hmm.
was kind of the first book I did that made me money. And then once you've done a book that made money, it gets a lot easier after that. Because I haven't really stopped working since that time. I did a book. Shortly after that, I kind of crossed over from the comics market to the mainstream book market
Hmm.
with a book called Two Generals, which was about my grandfather's experiences in World War II. And it's a popular book here in Canada. It's taught in high schools and universities, and a lot of people know it. It's one of those books that come out kind of every November for Remembrance Day. It ends up being talked about and read and discussed, and which is great, which is nice. It's nice to have a book that all these years later is still on people's minds.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I've done a bunch of leading up to Squire Knight. I've also done a bunch of um, kids fantasy stuff, just on the complete other end of the historical stuff. And that's really fun too. I started doing that once I had kids. And,
Yeah.
I always thought I was going to be more of like an adult historical cartoonist. But once I had kids and they got interested in knights and castles and things, I was like, oh, let's make some knights and castles comics for these kids. And
Yeah.
I did. Yeah. So yeah, that's just a brief encapsulation of my 20 some odd year career.
Love it. Love it. Well, you mentioned working in historical stories and fantasy stories. Are there other types of genres that you enjoy taking up or that you would like to take up as part of the creative vision?
Yeah, to date, it's been all either kids' fantasy or historical biography.
Hmm.
In addition to Two Generals, I've also done a few years ago a book about a jazz musician from the 20s named Bix Beiderbecke. And that book came out during the pandemic, and virtually no one knows it exists. But I was really proud of it. It was really creative in terms of trying to visualize music on the comics page,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
uh, and I was really happy with it. If people are listening to this, please go buy that book because it definitely got buried in the pandemic. Yeah, so those have kind of been the two sides of my career to this point, but I definitely the thing I'm writing now that I just closed so I could talk to you. I'm
Ah,
about 75% of the way through a script
uh-huh.
for a very long graphic novel that it's neither of those two things that I'm known for. It's set in the present day.
Nice, nice. Love it.
Yeah, it's something new for me. And yeah, is very kind of it's hard to describe. It's kind of slice of life, but it's also sort of magical realism and a bit philosophical and a tad autobiographical. And yeah, I won't tell you much more because it my agent hasn't sold it yet, and it definitely hasn't been announced anywhere, but it's what I've been thinking about recently, and it's yeah, it's kind of nice this deep into a career to change gears and try something new. It's kind of exciting and a little intimidating.
Yeah, yeah. But I love the range and love when people are taking on new challenges, telling stories in new ways, telling new kinds of stories. So looking forward to it as it shapes up.
Thank you. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm excited about it. It's gone. I was really frustrated. If you'd talked to me 2 weeks ago, I wouldn't have even been too sure I was doing it because I was in that really kind of messy middle part of the script where you're like, does this story even make any sense? What am I doing? But I got over the hump just in the last maybe 2 weeks or so, and it definitely feels like I'm running downhill now, and that this
Cool,
script is going to get finished and will almost certainly become a book at some point.
cool, cool. Awesome, awesome. Well, glad to catch you at a good time when the work is where it
That's
needs to
right.
be. Love it, love
Yeah.
it.
Today's one of the confident days.
Well, as an auteur, as somebody that sort of takes on so many parts of the process, I'm curious about what that creative process is like because I imagine that, especially looking at a long graphic novel, it's quite a haul. I imagine it's quite a journey.
It is. Yeah, it can take, yeah, depending on the page count of the book, it can take years. Like I say, I'm writing a script, so I do like to start with a script.
Hmm.
Some of my fellow cartoonists, think I'm crazy for writing scripts. They like to jump right into kind of thumbnailing the pages and sort of find the story visually that way,
Hmm.
which I can appreciate. But, when working with a publisher and an editor, sometimes, just to let them know what you're intending to do, the simplest way is just to write it down. Even doing quick thumbnail drawings page after page is, as I often say, it's quicker to type the word house than it is to draw a house.
Hmm. Hmm.
Even a very simple quick house. Um, so yeah, I will. That said, though, my scripts are pretty loose. They're just a note to myself about what I'm going to visualize later. So it'll be very brief point form descriptions of action and dialogue, and it will include page breaks because those are very important to the storytelling. You've got that nice bit every second page where the reader is going to turn, and it's nice to plan those. It's nice to
Hmm.
plan those reveals, which you get, like I say, every second page. But other than that, like I don't break it into panels or anything in the script. I save that for the thumbnail stage. And so thumbnail stage is, yeah, I just start going through my script and I consider that the second draft. I'm not at all married to what I've written in the script. I feel very much as if I'm writing it again visually now that
Hmm.
I understand what the story is.
Hmm.
So yeah, sometimes the thumbnail version barely resembles the scripted version, but I was only able to get there because I scripted it first and understood understood the conflicts and the themes and all the stuff that a lot of visual decisions need to hang on. So once an editor has hopefully approved the thumbnail version, I start tightening it up into tighter pencils. I do that digitally.
Hmm.
At least for the last couple books, I've done it digitally, which I find helps for moving stuff around. And I find I often, as I'm drawing, I'll be working out, and then I end up with a much bigger drawing than I thought. And so in the digital era, it's nice just to be able to take that thing you drew and reduce it back to 75 or 80%
Hmm.
to
Hmm.
make it fit in the panel the way you imagined it. Or, maybe someone's head is too big or too small or whatever. You can, fix that easy digitally without redrawing. And then it's on to inking, which is a thing I still do traditionally. It's about the only thing I still do traditionally. So I'll output those digital pencils to board and just ink with brushes and ink and pen and ink and whatever else might be at hand. And I like that. I like the combination of digital stuff, and it ends up with art that doesn't feel too digital.
Hmm. Hmm.
I kind of use the digital tools for the thinking and planning and stuff where the digital tools can be a help, but I still like to draw the lines people are going to actually see by hand so that it has
Nice,
that
nice.
that warmth of traditional handmade art. And then I scan it back into the computer. I color digitally in Photoshop, and somewhere in there the lettering goes in. I That's one of the things I don't do by hand, also because my hand lettering is terrible. So I'll plug a font in there, usually sometime in the early stages,
Hmm.
so that I can see how much room it's going to take up, and then I'll kind of pencil around that, and then
Nice.
stick the lettering back in, to be finalized at the end, and then we're done. And that's a lot of steps.
Yeah, yeah.
But what I like, yeah, comics are people who've never made comics don't appreciate how long it takes and
Hmm.
how many man hours are involved. But I like all those steps because each of them is a um, an opportunity to polish and hone and rethink
Hmm.
and revise. Right? They say that writing is rewriting, and the same is true with narrative art. The more time you've got to think about it, the longer you're sitting there with that page and creating all these iterations of it. Your head is really in that scene
Hmm. Hmm.
for all that time. And yeah, sometimes some really good ideas come at a fairly late stage, but it's not too late to make them because you had all those stages. It's great.
Yeah, yeah. But
Yeah.
then as the reader, there is so much on that page to appreciate. All the
Mhm.
details, all the line work, the things that are in the background. So
There's
it's
so
worth
many
pausing
decisions.
on.
Yeah. There are
Yeah,
so many decisions on any comics page. It almost boggles the mind.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. It's why we all look tired all the time.
yeah.
This is why I'm drinking this coffee right now.
Well, I can relate. Being a teacher, I drink coffee, but then I get to enjoy the conversations with creators. So it's water time for me, but the coffee continues on the creator side.
Perfect. Well, thank you.
Yeah, yeah. I think I have one more official question that's on the list, and then we can mention anything we might have missed from the talk, and that is creative vision moving forward. I know that Squire Knight, I know that's the book two is slated for October, I believe, right now from
Yep.
first second.
Yep.
So creative vision moving forward, and then places where you like to connect with readers is also something that I always like to make sure folks have the chance to share.
Cool. Yeah, there is the Squire and Knight sequel coming in October. It's called Wayward Travelers, so people
Hmm.
can be on the
Hmm.
lookout for that. Also, I mentioned earlier a kids' fantasy series I did years ago called Three Thieves is being republished by Papercutz,
Nice,
who
nice.
were recently acquired by Mad Cave Studios. So that's the thing people can look forward to because those books didn't get as big of an audience originally as I would have liked, and so those will be back on the market. They've been out of print for maybe 6 years now. So I'm really looking forward to that because there's seven of those, which is half of my backlist.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I think those will be coming out starting early next year and come out one per season. So yeah, I'll have a ton of books hitting in 2025. And then there's this thing I'm writing, which again, I can't tell you much more about than what I've told you, but that's a thing I'm hoping will make it into print at some point. So people can be on the lookout for that, hopefully. As for where to be on the lookout for it, Yeah, I don't know. Social media is kind of gross and getting grosser. I'm
Yeah.
down to just I'm down to just Instagram these days, which is
Hmm.
about the only one I can still stomach. Um, though even that has just, yeah, been revealed to be a training ground for generative AI. Um,
Yeah.
so I'm at Scott Chantler on Instagram. I've also been trying to get a Patreon off the ground. Not because I necessarily need the money, but like I say, I'm getting to be really self-conscious about posting art online
That
in
makes
the
sense. Yeah.
in the generative AI era.
Yeah.
Uh, just seems like everything's being used as training data now. But it's been pretty slow going. Like trying to start over with a new platform is tough, and getting the people to pay anything, even a little bit on the internet for to see stuff is hard. People are so used to stuff on the internet being free. But if people want to, throw down a couple of bucks a month to support old Scott Chantler here, I am on Patreon, so go check that out. I've been posting a lot of work in progress stuff about things I'm working on, and as this new project gets up and running, there will probably be a very in-depth look at what I'm doing there. You'll be able to feel like you're here in the studio with me. So
Nice.
yeah,
Nice.
check Instagram and Patreon are the two places you can find me online.
Awesome. Well, I'll be sure and provide those links in the description and the video. Anything that we've missed that you want to make sure to share.
I don't think so. I think
All
we've
right.
covered it.
All right. Sounds great. Sounds great. We aim for brisk and on point. It's been a great conversation and glad to have you back anytime to talk about projects as they come to be. Also glad to hear that you're working with Mad Cave because they're another one of my favorites as well. So
Yeah,
excited to see that.
they've really been coming on strong lately.
Hmm.
They've, I mean, they've got my stuff, which is kind of small potatoes, but they actually also did that Disney deal recently, and they've got the King Features stuff like Flash Gordon and Dick
Yeah.
Tracy, and
Yeah.
they got a lot of fun toys right now. Plus, they do a
Hmm.
whole line of creator-owned books, and yeah, they really, yeah, they're really stepping on the gas. They're here to play.
And it's
Yeah.
fun. It's fun. Good
Yeah,
stuff to read.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Totally.
All right. Well, thank you so much again and glad to talk anytime.
Thank you, Jason. Thanks for having me.